Here we are then at the end of the summer. We've made it. We hope you've really enjoyed our mini teaching series around meals, a meal with Jesus. Jesus came eating and drinking. Our final meal focuses on a Sunday, Celebration Sunday. And in a moment, we're going to think about the importance of the communion meal, that last meal that Jesus had with his disciples that was packed with such significance. But before we do that, we thought it might be helpful just to reflect between the two of us on the meal that meant most to us as we prepared and thought about these various meals. Claire, what about you? What's the meal that sticks in your mind?
I think for me, when we were talking about and filming the Serving Saturday meal, I felt quite emotional actually. I think that to think about that final banquet and everyone who was welcome around that table says so much of who God is. That there's always a welcome. There's no boundaries to his love, and that he welcomes us to the table, and that banquet would have been abundant, and there would have been amazing food, and that everybody was provided for. So I felt really emotional about that. I felt very humbled about our communities here at Burlington, and how actually there are so many things we could do, but all of them are based around feeding people and welcoming people, and the power of God in that. That was just a really powerful session for me. It made me question how we do that at home with our family. Even getting our kids to do the washing up sometimes feels hard. So I think that's a challenge for us as we think that through. What about you?
I guess mine's kind of similar. I obviously think about Zacchaeus as my favourite biblical character. But I was thinking about the way that he felt welcomed. He was treated as a tax collector. He was treated as an outcast, not just because he was short. And the way that Jesus met him and his whole family around that meal occasion, and just to be conscious of the power of what Jesus can do when we invite people that we're in relationship with around the meal and let the conversation flow. And it made me think about how we can be even more conscious as a family that when we eat and share together, that Jesus is at work in those moments. This is not just a functional time of getting the energy that we need to get through the day or to feed us because we're all starving, which we usually are, but just to slow the process down. And Kerry's really helpful for us in that, because she wants to make it beautiful, to reflect something of the moment. And I've learned so much through that, the sort of slowing down. This isn't just about food. This is about a moment together, and more so a moment with God. And for Zacchaeus, that was just a whole life-changing thing. So I think that's the one that sticks in my mind, and renewed emphasis of creating those moments and just being conscious that Jesus is there and at work in the midst of it. So we push on into those different things that God's teaching us and working that out in our meals and in our family. So for this one, Celebration Sunday, Luke chapter 22. If you've got a Bible, perhaps just pause the video, grab hold of the Bible for a moment, and have it open in front of you. It's a very familiar passage to all of us, I'm sure, when Jesus broke bread and shared wine, talked about his death and anticipated his resurrection. But something really cool that has come home to us, that in that moment, in that meal, all of the other meals that we've been talking about are captured. So we thought about Mission Monday, and in this meal, Jesus is talking about his mission. He reminds them in verse 15 and verse 16 of Luke chapter 22 that those around the table, that he came to lay down his life. He came on mission to them. And then a few verses later, verse 18 and 19, he was teaching them. He was using the meal as a teaching opportunity to remind them of why he'd come to die and what the significance of his death would be and how they could trust in his resurrection. So Mission Monday and Teaching Tuesday, and so it goes on, Claire, doesn't it, through the rest of the story?
It does. So What's Up Wednesday, if you think about the people gathered around the table, some of them are named, some of them we just kind of think would have been there, the people that were following him, that had travelled with him, the women, the children. These guys had been travelling together for 3 years. They had become an oikos. They were his extended family. Even Judas, who was going to go on to betray him, was present because he'd been part of that community, part of that family. So this was a family meal, an oikos meal, a thanksgiving meal as well, because in verse 19, Jesus goes on to talk about how he broke bread and he gave thanks. This was a meal that was around Thanksgiving as well, remembering who was the provider of that bread, who was the one who sustained and provided for them. We've also got an element of fun, though. You can read about how they would have prepared for the Passover meal, finding the place with the donkey, finding the right venue. It would have been a big occasion to have a Passover in your house. And there would have been lots of things to organise, but they would have been done as a family in a fun way. And then, of course, with John's account of this, we find out that just before the meal, Jesus washed feet. So that servant Saturday that we talked about is expressed here as well. Before the meal, it would have been expected that someone would have washed feet. But for Jesus to do it, Jesus came to seek and save the lost, but he also came to serve, not be served. That comes across through the Last Supper as well, this servant-hearted nature of a meal. And now we come, I guess, to this last bit, the remembering. This meal has become for us a chance to remember what God has done for each of us. As we remember when we eat and drink of the bread and wine, we go from remembering to celebrating very quickly. Because as we remember the amazing thing God has done for each of us, for me and for you, it very quickly turns to thankfulness, and it very quickly turns to celebration, because actually God has saved each of us and he has a plan for each of us, and our sins are washed away, every single one of them. That can only lead us to celebration, to worship, which is why when we gather around the Lord's table in church, we surround it with worship and thanks. We say prayers of thanks. We sing songs of celebration. This celebration meal begins with remembrance, turns to thanksgiving, and becomes a celebration. And so we've got a few things that you might want to do this week. We've done this video particularly early because tomorrow on Sunday is our first Sunday back for this term, the 1st of September, and we're going to have a family communion together. Everyone's going to stay in and we're going to share communion together. We would really love to see you there, 10:45 as normal. Please come, bring your whole family as we celebrate the Lord's Supper together. Number 2, though, you might want to gather your community together, your small group or your friends this week and share communion around the table. We've done that a lot recently, and it's such a joy to share communion around your own table. You don't need to get the right words. It doesn't need to be anything like that. Read the Bible passage together and just share communion, bread and wine together. Number 3, though, some of you might have made some nice placemats this week with things that in the last weeks about what you're thanking God for. Or maybe you want to make another one just before the kids go back to school of things that you're thanking God for about the summer. Or you could turn that into a teachable moment. What have we learnt this summer that we're taking into this term? Turn that into a placemat, laminate it again so it doesn't get disgusting when you drop spaghetti bolognese on it, and use that into this term to remember what you have learnt over this summer. Number 4, though, on Monday at 12 to 1:30, so Monday the 2nd of September, just before all the children rush back to school, we are going to invite you to bring your pack lunch to the church centre at 12 o'clock. And we're going to eat together, sharing our pack lunch if you haven't brought one. And then we're going to spend a bit of time praying for the term that is to come. We're going to pray for those starting school. We're going to pray for teachers. We're going to pray for families. We're going to pray for anybody who shows up to that day, and just pray for each other as we start this term. It's an opportunity for us to start this term well with God. So do come along, 12 o'clock, and bring your sandwiches.
And just as we bring this whole thing to a conclusion, it feels to us like maybe it's just the beginning. The life that God's called us to is a balance of celebration and community. And it struck me afresh as we were preparing these teachings that we put a lot of effort into celebration when we gather in a particular place, which is the church, and that becomes an important, and rightly so, an important place for us when we gather to worship. But as we've been thinking about community, I wonder whether there is another place that is equally as important to Burlington, and that's your table and mine. that those are God-given places for the life, the mission, the discipleship of our church to take place. Celebration and community, gathering in church and around our tables, or to use the New Testament language, meeting daily in the temple courts and from house to house. We wrestled a little bit to think about what we should bring for this summer series. And I remember the call when Claire rang me up and said, I think I've got it. I think I understand where we should be going. And I couldn't have agreed more. What we've brought and what she brought to us around this idea of Jesus eating and drinking around our meal tables feels hugely significant. Not a pattern or a gimmick or a hobby for the summer, but things that become a way of life. 21 meals a week. Even if we tithed our meals and just chose 2, that we would try and particularly give a kingdom dimension, a kingdom emphasis to through this coming term, we would be the church in the places and with the people where God has put us. And that at the end of the day is the calling on all our lives. So let's grab hold of what we've shared together over these weeks and take it with us into the season ahead. We really look forward to seeing you tomorrow and on Monday, 10:45 tomorrow and 12 o'clock on Monday. Hey, God bless you around all of your tables.